All right. I had a really cute outfit picked out for today with like heels and everything, but after having several Tennessee mules with Dr. Moon last night, I decided on the jeans and the cowboy boots. So if you can't tell, I live in Texas. Originally from Louisiana though, but if you ever go to Louisiana, please have the food. And if you go to Mardi Gras, leave the kids. Even though they say it's family friendly, it is not. Awesome. Well, I am the former head of People Insights and Assessments at Dell as mentioned. As it's been an adjustment, it's only been a couple of weeks. So everyone keeps asking me what I'm going to go do next, and I am planning on irresponsibly using my severance package to go to Jamaica and Cabo and sit on the beach and have a Mai Tai. Just for a couple of months. Eventually I'm going to need money, that kind of thing. But my team at Dell, the People Insights team was in charge of our research strategy, our talent research strategy, our assessment strategy, as well as our listening strategy. So we designed a lot of internal assessments from scratch. Dell we think we're special, so we have to do all of our assessments and create them based on our values and principles. So a lot of building assessments. Our listening strategy was a lot of work, but we got it to a really good place and designed that from scratch as well. And then also our talent research. Talent research is probably my favorite part of what my team was doing, which is really just taking these big questions that the company had and just being able to answer them with science and data. And so it was really cool, a lot of fun work. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about Dell, just kind of give you the context of the company, and then hop into how we really started to build a data-driven culture with our leadership teams. So most people remember Dell from the 90s commercial, the dude, you're getting a Dell commercial, right? And so it's been like a long time. We've grown a lot. So Dell does a lot more than just PCs and laptops now. We've grown kind of from this end-to-end customer perspective where we have servers and clouds and a lot of storage offerings as well. And actually our PC business is one of our smaller businesses now, though it is the most known to most kind of consumers. Most people don't know that Dell Technology is in self-driving cars. It's helping with cell towers and making the speed faster. It's in farms, it's in hospitals. And so we really have branched out. I think we haven't done the best job of like showcasing all of the work and all of the products and services that we have, because I think our brand is still much PCs and laptops, but it is really an end-to-end kind of consumer. And so one of the cool things was, not cool because it was a pandemic, but the pandemic really helped us in the sense that because we provide security in clouds and servers, so many of these companies needed to get all of their team members remote and virtual really fast. So we were able to, in weekends and sometimes in a week, get all these customers into these virtual spaces because of our end-to-end solutions. So while a lot of companies were struggling during the pandemic, we had record-breaking kind of revenue doing unprecedented times. So really good to kind of have that solution that was really needed during the pandemic. But Dell is not just a really big revenue company. We win tons of amazing awards in terms of inclusion, in terms of ethics. We've actually been on the world's most ethical companies list for 13 years. We do pride ourselves in the fact that you probably won't open the newspaper and see a really big scam about Dell. Not often. There's been a couple, but not a ton. And so we really pride ourselves in all the work that we do. We're one of the most loved companies. And so with the revenue, with all our awards, you can kind of suffice that Dell is a pretty decent company, a really great company. I think we make 40 years next year, and sorry, I will say we and our, even though I don't work there anymore, but we make 40 years next year. So it's been a really good journey and really cool to see the growth of the company from the time Michael was in his dorm room. I do also say Michael like we're on a first name basis, but I've only met him 3 times, but Michael Dell is who I'm referring to when I say Michael. Since he made the first laptop in his UT dorm room years and years ago. So with that, I wanted to start with what great organizations need to succeed. If we consider Dell a great company, some of the things we looked at is like what makes us a great company. And the real big things are strategy, culture, and leadership. So having a strategy that's going to position you to win in the marketplace, but also having a culture that enables that strategy, and then having leaders that are there to drive that strategy. And so these are the three big things that a lot of companies have to focus on in order to be successful. So working on what's your strategy, how are you going to win, but then also realizing your culture has to support that. If you're creating a heavy on the sales organization, you're going to want a competitive type culture where there's leaderboards and awards and things like that, right? If you're doing an innovative type culture, you're going to want kind of safe spaces where people are willing to provide advice and share their voices and have psychological safety so people can share their opinions and generate ideas. And so making sure that culture you create supports that strategy, but then your leaders have to be able to have the behaviors and showcase the culture through them as well. Culture starts with the leadership, right? And so making sure that leader behaviors align with what your culture is trying to shape and strategy as well. And these things are dynamic. So strategy changes, culture and leadership also need to shift. And so keeping in mind that these things are always shifting as the company strategy shifts, but they're all so closely related. And so a really big piece is understanding if leaders are driving that culture that's enabling the strategy, what are the things that we need to be looking at leaders for? They need to know what behaviors are necessary for them to be exhibiting. How do we measure those behaviors? How do we make sure they're looking at the right things, they're doing the right things? And so when we talk about data-driven leadership, a really big piece of that is important, not just to the culture, but to the strategy of the company overall. So quick question, how many people are satisfied with their current pay? And if your manager is in the room, don't look left or right, look straight ahead. Anybody like, yes, I'm satisfied? All right, a couple folks. Okay, cool, yes. And so we actually did some research with a bunch of IT companies, Microsoft, HP, Lenovo, Cisco. We all got together and looked across all of our questions in our engagement survey. No matter how we asked, what we asked, compensation was always the least scoring question across the board. And the reason being is no one's going to tell you, yeah, I make enough money, don't pay me anymore, right? Like said no one ever. And so for a leader, then how do you make those decisions about if you have limited budget for your team, who gets the bonus, who doesn't, who gets the merit increase, who doesn't? And so these are the type of decisions that leaders have to make. How do we enable them to make those decisions in a way that's not just based on intuition or their thoughts, but based on evidence and data? And the same thing for things like performance reviews. We actually looked at some data that said that leaders spend about 70 minutes per performance review just writing them for their teams, and team members spend 80 minutes writing their self-assessments. So that's a lot of time spent in total, like writing these performance reviews. So how do you go about creating something that's more productive or something that's more efficient? And so these are all these questions, and there's many more questions that so many times we base it on intuition versus evidence. And so when you're looking at things like fair ways to evaluate employees, increasing diversity, how do we attract talent? A lot of times we say, okay, we could attract talent. For me, my intuition to this was give me free coffee. Like you'll attract me that way. Dell makes me pay $7 for a cup of coffee, $7. And then one time I was like, okay, I got them. I showed up with I already had my tea bag, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna have to pay for tea. I just need a cup. And they're like, yep, 25 cents for that cup. So I'm like, okay, so, a lot of times for me, attracting top talent is things like having free, like in the tech industry, it might be the nap pods and all these different things. Like we all have these different ideas of how to answer these questions, how to prevent the best employees from leaving. But in order to answer them, we have to stop relying on intuition and really answer them from an evidence-based perspective. And so there was this quote, and I think, Michael, you might have mentioned this yesterday, but it was from Dawn Klinkhofer, one of our colleagues in people analytics, where she says, if I have learned anything from the twin crisis of 2020, is that people analytics is at the center of everything. And when she says twin crises, she's referencing the pandemic plus the racial reckoning in the US. And so these were unprecedented times. We couldn't rely on intuition. We had no idea what the heck we were doing, right? And so you had to have this shift where we need data, we need evidence, we need some form of direction, because intuition doesn't work in situations situations where we've never been there before, right? And so data became really critical. And I actually read this article the other day that said people analytics teams increased by 65%, and then 75% of companies said they plan on increasing them again in the future. So you're going to see this huge uptick of this need for data, and so building these data-driven cultures is going to be really critical. And so Dell views our advantage, the fact that we do use science, facts, and data to really drive every decision that we make. I am very beneficial in that my CHRO that I worked for 10 years is an IO psychologist. And so she's a scientist trained, and she's very, very into data. And so when she has conversations with Michael, they're always talking about the numbers and the data, which puts my people insights team in a very good place because they always have to come to us for the data and the research. But literally everything that we do in HR and across the company, everyone goes, what do the numbers say? Where's the data? And so I think it's been a really good advantage, and the reason why we did so well, not just during the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, is because we do make these decisions based on science, facts, research, and data. And we use our culture and our people philosophies and things like that to ground it. But we also really focus on the voice of our team members to really amplify a lot of those decisions. And so this is our listening strategy. I won't spend too much time on this, but wanted to give context because the voice of our team members is such a critical part to how we look at the data, how we make sure that we're using evidence. And so we do 3 different things. We call them engagement, pulse, and life cycle. Engagement is our annual engagement survey. It happens twice a year. We send out one. We get a 96% response rate on that one. So, and then all 130,000 team members respond to that engagement survey, and all 12,000 leaders receive a report with data. So it's a really big signature practice for us, and it measures our culture, measures how our leaders are doing, and it's how we hold leaders accountable for making sure that they're fostering cultures within their teams more effectively. Pulse is different. Pulse is more so those more quick surveys we need to get done. So as things happen, we have, like with hybrid work, we did a quick pulse to understand vaccine mandates, who wanted them, who didn't. Lots of interesting comments in that one. Looking across the board at like who wants to go into the office, who doesn't. And so those were kind of our pulses on key topics when things like the Great Resignation come up, or all these things come up in like the Forbes and things that we have to go investigate. Our pulse strategy allows us to quickly get answers to leaders about those key topics. Like, hey, you're worried about the Great Resignation, but 85% of your team intends to stay at Dell. So having those quick kind of responses is what is important for Pulse. And then life cycle is kind of the end-to-end employee experience. So looking at the candidate experience, onboarding, M&As, all the way down to the exit surveys. And so we take this full listening strategy from engagement, pulse, and life cycle, merge it all together, and we really have this really cool picture from the start to the end of what our employees are feeling about these different topics, and it's really been key to how we built a data-driven culture. So with that, I'll give a couple of examples. So data-driven culture. So this is our culture code. This is kind of, you'll see it, it's on our Dell website. It's who we are, what we believe, our values, our principles. Every company has that, right? It's how we work, it's how we lead. Cute little slide. How we got there, no one knows, right? And so that's where the story behind all of this. So this is actually years of work from my team to get to this one single slide, right? And so story time. So back in 2015, Dell merged with a company. Actually, Michael, you mentioned this yesterday with EMC. Dell merged with a company called EMC. EMC had 70,000 employees. Dell had 100,000. EMC was based in Boston. Dell was based in Texas. EMC was more big consumer storage clouds. Dell was more laptops, PCs at the time. And so our intuition said, this is going to be a nightmare. How are we going to, one, Dell was acquiring the company. It wasn't a merger. So how are we going to make these two companies that are very different come together into one single company? And so first thing we did was surveys. We decided we were going to go and talk to EMC employees before they even joined. We went out to 25,000 of them and asked them, like, what are the things that you feel like make your company successful? We gave them 30 attributes. And now that list started with like a bunch of research, and we had like 200 attributes. We narrowed it down to 30, and then they could also write in if there was additional ones. And then we did the same thing at Dell, about 75,000 employees. We asked them the same thing. What makes Dell successful? What attributes? And what we found was that the top 5 attributes were actually the exact same. No matter how we cut it, people were like, customers, winning together, integrity, these are the things that are important to us. So it was super cool to see that alignment, even though we thought it was going to be very different. But this is how we were able to merge 2 companies together in a way that united them. We introduced this culture code, and we were able to say, here's the data that you all gave us that really drove this decision. And so when we became one company, this was like a unification piece, right? It was a way for them to be like, oh, we all have something in common, what? And so it was really a good opportunity to like bring everybody together. And so we also went through and had focus groups, and we talked to a bunch of people about what these things were, the behaviors behind them. And so it was a really cool kind of way to just define our culture in a time that was critical, using data, using research, and using those conversations with our team members to really land in a really good place. So with that, after we defined the culture code, at the data-driven talent planning was our next step. So we've got our values, we've got our principles, then we took it a step lower and we said, okay, now after principles, after values, we need behaviors. And so like I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to understand what behaviors are necessary for your leaders in order to track them and make sure that they are aligning with your strategy and your culture. So we did a bunch of research, focus groups, surveys, and defined what leadership behaviors were critical. We defined what leadership skills were critical, and then we also looked at, for our executives, what experiences were critical for them. So we did a really good job of just researching and finding out and kind of describing and defining all of these different pieces that are really key to understanding what our leaders needed to do. From that, we wanted to make sure we could measure it. So once we defined it, we needed data to measure if they're actually meeting these things. So like I mentioned, with our assessment strategy, Dell Thinks We're Special, we design everything in-house. We did try to partner with a couple of assessment vendors. That's how that went. So we ended up writing our own and creating our own questions, but they were aligned to our values and our principles. And so we designed one that was super cool. So when someone joins the company or someone becomes a new leader, they get this simulation that was based on moments that matter. So we did a lot of interviews and understood what are the key moments for a leader. Some people mentioned like having your first performance conversation, having to do with a conflict for the first time. So what this assessment does is it gives them a simulation where like, hey, looks like you have your first one-on-one with your new team member, and a little thing pops up and they click it and they can go have a dialogue with the new team member. And at the end of it, they get a report that says, here's kind of how you show up within our culture. And so it gives them something useful to measure and have data behind how they're doing. And we make sure that we frame it where it's not about like, here's how you fit in with our culture. No, we always frame it as like culture add. Like, here are the things that are strengths that you can bring, that you can add to the table. So that's one of them. We designed another one that uses machine learning and algorithms, where it actually asks these big, broad questions like, what's leadership to you? Or how do you view yourself in the next 5 years? And then the algorithm on the back end, we trained it so that it kind of pulls keywords and things like that. And at the end, they get a report that's aligned to those leadership skills. It's like, here's your scores on all these skills. And HR and the leader can go look at that, and as they're making talent planning decisions, they can say, okay, this person might have a skill gap in this space. Let's go put them in this role where they can gain it. And so we tried to design so many assessments that allowed data to be added to the conversations. Instead of just putting someone or promoting someone into this position, now you could at least have one piece of data from this assessment that says, oh, well, maybe this should go differently, or maybe they should go this role instead. And so it wasn't meant to replace the whole humans and leaders know their people, but it was a way to add science and data to those talent planning conversations. Executive experiences. Before we moved to an executive or someone to an executive, we had this checklist of here are the key experiences we've defined. Do they meet them all, or do they have gaps? And if they have gaps, how can we get them in the right places? So it's really been cool to see how we've used the research and the data to really shape our talent planning strategy within the company. Data-driven accountability is a big one. I will spend way too much time on the slide because it's my favorite. Tell Dell is my baby. Tell Dell is what we call our employee engagement survey. I did not make the name, but it's super catchy, right? And so Tell Dell is the one that we do once a year, and we do a check-in later in the year, but the big one is once a year in May. Goes to all 130,000 team members. We translate it into 27 different languages. We get a 90 to 96% response rate back. And it is truly engraved in our culture. I always tell the story. I was sitting at a bar one day in Austin, and thought I was just chilling, having a drink. And then this conversation next to me was like, "Oh, my Tell Dell scores were da 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 da." I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I can't escape work." And so then, of course, I turned around. I was like, "That's me. I did that. That's Tell Dell." And then we're like, "Oh my God, you're Tell Dell." And so it was a really interesting conversation. And then they were like, "I have questions for you. Is this really true? Is it anonymous?" And then the whole bar situation just became a work call. But anyway, it was super cool just to know that anyone you talk to at Dell, if you say the words Tell Dell, they'll know what you're talking about because it's just that engraved within the culture. And so every leader gets a report. One of the things we added it before, took it out, we added it again, was an inclusion index. So back to kind of the murder of George Floyd during that year, we decided it was more critical, even more, to add an inclusion index back into the survey. So we ask about 10 questions that are leader-based, that are org-based, that are based on inclusion and creating psychological safety within teams. And so the way that we hold leaders accountable is that if a leader is 60% or lower from their teams on those scores, they get an optional consultation with HR. If they then, second year in a row, are still 60% or lower, they get a mandatory consultation with HR. Third year, they're out. They're either no longer a leader or they're gone from the company. And so this was a way for us to stop being performative and just saying you need to foster a culture of inclusion and putting some teeth behind it. It's like, okay, you actually have to foster an inclusive environment in your team. Have a dialogue about your scores, because each one of our 12,000 leaders have to sit down and have a dialogue about their Tell Dell scores. And we provide them with reports, we provide them with action planning guides and resources, but they have to have those conversations. And so it's a good way to learn. If a leader feel like their scores are low, they can have that dialogue with their team and understand, what can I do better? How can I shift? How can I change? Their scores are high. What are we doing good? How can we help other people? And so it's a really good opportunity. And it's not just the inclusion scores, those 4 buckets, it's the same accountability for all of them. If your leader score is low, culture score is low, same type of thing. But we really added that inclusion score in there and separated it from culture because we wanted to make sure that it stood out as a key metric for leaders and hold them accountable for fostering inclusive environments. Since we've added it, we've seen a huge increase in our inclusion scores over the last couple of years, and we hope to continue to see that. So it's been cool to see the progress being made as leaders have learned and been able to have open dialogues with their teams over the last couple of years. We also provide action planning guides too that will have, again, detailed questions, resources, things they can go do, things to read that also help them if they have low scores too. Okay, data-driven decisions. So data-driven decisions, this is kind of just how do we make sure that we're making, this is more the senior level, leadership level, that we're making decisions based on data. Sorry, I didn't realize this slide was a build and I hate builds. Oh my gosh, it's the worst. And so this is an old one. I'll do a new one next. But one of the decisions we made a long time ago was analysis we did with Tell Dell data and performance data. And so historically, Dell had those 5 ratings you see on the side. This was back in 2013 when we did this analysis. We just looked at what happened if someone was surprised by their rating. So if someone was positively surprised, say they expected to be mixed, but they got a good, we saw a huge uptick in engagement. If someone was not surprised at all, they thought they were going to be a best, they got a best, they're good, engagement was meh, it was there, right? It wasn't bad, it wasn't good. If someone was negatively surprised, so say they thought they were going to be a best and they got a great, they were extremely lowly engaged, and we also saw them more likely to leave the company. And so what we found was we were losing great and good talent just because we were putting them in a box that they thought that was not what their box should be. And so this data was showed to Michael, and literally, same conversation, he said drop ratings. So Dell has had no performance ratings since 2013. And so instead we do qualitative performance reviews. And I remember even as an intern at Dell when I got there, I was like, how do you do anything without a performance review? How do you manage talent? And I remember sitting down and talking to legal, and they were like, I was like, how do you, if someone challenges something, without a rating, what do you do? They're like, we actually like it better, because if I say this person is a best, another leader might think they're a good. How do I challenge that just because of a one word? If I have a qualitative review, I can read exactly what this person said and read exactly what this other person said, and it's so much better, easier to actually combat it, because I'm like, these persons use this word, it's more descriptive. And so we have not had ratings since, and that's been, almost 10 years. So that was just another way that we use data to really make a key decision for the company. One more I'll talk about in decisions was hybrid work. So Dell was hybrid before the pandemic. We actually had 64% of our team members that were already hybrid or remote before the pandemic hit. We actually had a goal to be fully virtual, fully remote by 2020. Of course, the pandemic allowed us to reach that goal. And so we are a special case. So we've been doing a lot of research because we have pre-data, because we were hybrid and remote before, and post-data. So we've been comparing the two and looking at differences. But one of the things that we've been doing is debunking a lot of the myths that people say about hybrid work. And I do recognize Dell, because we had this kind of virtual world before, as a little bit of a nuance, right? A little bit different. Oh my gosh, my time, and I have like 10 more slides. Oh well. But it was super cool to be able to pull the old research that we had done before and then look at the new research that not since the pandemic. But what we found was that people loved having the flexible work arrangements. And there's so many concerns that people are not going to feel the culture. They're not going to be able to be promoted. They're going to have all these disadvantages. We found the opposite. Our leaders actually, we saw that there was no difference in inspirational leadership. There was no difference in feeling supported by your leader, whether you're a remote, hybrid, or in an office. Engagement, no difference in engagement scores, no difference in experiencing our culture, and no difference in having meaningful work. Commitment, there was no difference found for people that wanted to leave. We actually found in one of our second studies that people that were remote were more likely to stay. And there was no difference in inclusion. People felt connected. Their coworkers felt like they still had a voice. And so for us, and again, it's not the same at every company, but for us, our data was showing this is working, right? And so then we did another study after the pandemic, and we found similar things where people felt like being remote was not going to have this negative impact on their career and their growth. And so what did we do for our strategy? Everyone can do what the heck they want. We don't care. Some people come into an office, some people don't go into an office. I live 4 minutes from the Dell office. I probably went in twice in 5 years. I went in for special meetings, right? It was just this need for flexibility. Even with the mandates, that was something that was all over the place. So we decided some people can have mandates, some people can just bring in their screening and say they got the test. So our policy on flexible work is do whatever feels best for you, because our data says it's working this way. So why would we change? And so that was just a really big data-driven decision that we did as well. We'll do 2 more, data-driven guidance. And so one of the things that we like to do is provide our leaders with as much guidance as we can. So we did this study and we looked at the drivers of decisions to stay or go. During the Great Resignation, everyone was spinning. I don't know how many leaders were like, oh my God, my people are gonna leave me. And so what we did was we wanted to give them something to say, hey, here's something you can do to make sure your leaders do stay. Number one thing that showed up in our survey for why people stay or go was growth. And it wasn't like, I want to be promoted. It was more so, I just want to learn new skills. And so we decided to make sure that we had learning programs that enable people to go learn new skills. The second one was energy. People were burnt out, right? A lot of people were burnt out during the pandemic. So we did a whole bunch of things. We did a well-being. The comms team did a fantastic job of creating this well-being campaign with all these different things. And so that was a really cool thing. And then last one was trust. And so making sure we did a training, we called it the Trust Advantage for our leaders, to learn about building trust and fostering trust in their teams. So if we understand with the data what's going to keep our team members, we then have really clear actions about what we need to go do and what we can kind of make sure that we're doing and enabling our leaders to do in order to be successful. And last one here was money. People listen when you put dollar signs on a slide. So we looked at sales attainment and we looked at kind of inspirational leadership and uninspiring leaders. And so what we found was team members that had a leader that was inspiring had significantly higher, I X'd out the number because I'm legal reasons, had significantly higher sales attainment. And then people that had uninspiring leaders had significantly lower sales attainment that was costing the company $1 billion. Just simply by having a good leader, you are more likely to have more revenue. And so putting this slide in front of Michael where he sees bad leaders are costing me $1 billion a year, made things move, right? I'm like, if you're able to show someone the dollar amount and be able to tie it to company goals, it's huge. So this was a really impactful slide that allowed us to do a lot of more leadership trainings and invest in leader development. We had invested in different talent, hypo programs and things like that. So again, just guidance. This data was just used to guide them in the right direction to make sure that the strategies and the processes and the things we were focusing on were really important. The key is communicating insights to leaders in a way that's actionable. You see pretty slides that I'm showing. There is tons of regressions and analysis and all these things, right, going behind all of these things. There's so much work behind it, but it's really important that we were able to take all of that and we do what we call tip sheets, where we send out in like our manager emails this little one slide of like, hey, here's some key actions you can take. This was one that we did, it was during hybrid work, and we simplified it a little bit more after this, but it was like, hey, actions leader can take for hybrid work. It was like, instead of productivity, target accountability, and then it's the data of here's why that is, or create team norms for hybrid work. We did one on meaningful work. We did one on creating connection. So we used our data to create these one slide tip sheets that we were able to share with our leaders where, again, they don't know all the nerdy stuff that we did in the back end, right? But they have these really cool actionable data points that they can now go say, here's what I can do with the data that you've provided me. I think this is my last slide. Oh, and then I always do this. And then there's never been a presentation where this slide will not show up. So if you ever see me present again, it'll show up there too. But don't forget the people and people analytics. I think it's just huge. Like, I'm talking about a lot of numbers, but there's people behind those numbers. One of the things that one of my team members talked about was work flexibility shows up as a #1 differentiator for Dell across the board, no matter how many times we ask it. But she was like, we were thinking about, do we go and say it again? Like, we always say work flexibility. We say it every time we do it. I was like, but this time let's go with a story. And she was like, can we use my mom? And I was like, okay. And so her mom was diagnosed with cancer. And she was able to sit with her mom while she was working and have the flexibility while her mom was going through chemo to sit right next to her. And so going through and saying work flexibility is important to our team members, but giving that personal human story to it changed the whole room. And they had heard the data point 1,000 times, right? Like, so it wasn't like it was new data, but adding that personal story to it made it human, made the kind of human element pop up to the numbers. And so we do a lot of focus groups and interviews with people and read a lot of comments because those personal stories are so critical to making the numbers come alive. That's it. Thank you.
So going back to the money slide, right? The effect of toxic leaders on the bottom line that you showed. Not every leader is coachable. Mm-hmm. So there's an importance in actually taking action on those toxic leaders. Did Dell take action on that?
Yeah, for sure. We give that 3-year warning. So if they're low on that leader score 3 times, they're out.
And I think that's a key part in a culture, is showing that you're willing to support that.
Yes. Yeah. Now, do we do it right every time?
Fair enough.
But we try.
Thank you so much. There's so much packed in there. I'm like, okay, how many more hours can I get with you before you leave? Can you talk a little bit about maybe the impact of the use of the assessments? Specifically, you talked kind of halfway through about helping leaders. I can't remember the exact, but any of these assessments that you're giving to leaders to allow them to then progress and grow. Can you talk about the impact that it's had, any stories about how it's demonstrating its validity.
Yeah, for sure. And like one of these assessments, the algorithm one that I talked about, literally took us 6 years to build it. So a lot, to your point, a lot of just work and all hard work going into making sure that it's right, especially when you're talking about machine learning and algorithms. But once we were able to get it launched and developed, it was a huge impact. Leaders were able to, they felt like they had a little bit more guidance in decisions. So sometimes we'll have leaders, especially at the executive level, go in and rate potential. So we don't have performance ratings. We have potential for some cases. And so rating potential ratings, they were able to, the assessment spits out a potential rating for them. And they're like, okay, I would have had this person as higher potential, but it looks like this assessment has them lower. Let's have a conversation. So it's never let me switch just because the assessment said so. It's like it enables a dialogue to happen about what might I be missing or what might be key things I need to add or think through before I put this person's rating. So the feedback we got is more helpful in like helping to drive some of those conversations that lead to the decisions. Yeah.
Great presentation, thank you. I think you had mentioned, I was trying to take notes on what you were saying, but I think you mentioned something to the effect of you put into place or did some research on executive experiences and how you're delivering insights and information and actual intelligence to them. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so that was a fun one. So we took years and years of succession plans that had been developed at Dell, probably 6 years of succession plans, and we went through them all, and we looked at kind of what the succession plans were saying, because we give detailed succession plans of like, what the skill sets, what's the gaps, and all these different things these people need. So we went through and literally coded, okay, what's the gap for this one? What's the thing, the things they're saying they have, and then we aggregated it all, and it was like overall across all these different business units for the last 6 years, these are the things that these succession plans have said are gaps most of our executives might have, and these are the things they're saying that are actually strengths that they have. And from there, we were able to come up, and we narrowed it down to 14 core experiences, which started with a lot, but we were able to narrow it down to like, here are the 14 core things, but it was based on succession planning data for the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, for sure.
Great presentation, Stephanie. How do you foster engagement of employees? How do leaders engage their employees to focus more on using the data to take action and not just as a punitive, or in some cases leaders may think that employees may think that leaders want just high scores. So
Yeah.
any tip on that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one. So our scores have been like super, super high. And so we did some benchmarking with, like, we're in this IT group, right? So we did benchmarking with all the rest of the IT companies because we like to share like where we're at. And it's been a trend where all of our scores have just like consistently gotten higher. And it's been the question. It's like, okay, why are they constantly increasing? Especially if like, will be interesting to see what happens this year with all the layoffs, if they still increase. But I think the trend has been that people, once they get into tech, because it's such a good like line item on your resume, people are actually really excited to be there. Like there's a lot of people that really feel passionate about what they do. And I think my opinion is that the scores are genuine. And we've asked, this has been funny, we've asked people like in separate surveys, do you answer honestly on your survey responses? We've asked, do you feel pressured by your leader? And all those scores have been like, I don't feel pressured. Now we get bad apples, right? I had one the other day that joined a Zoom call and made all of them share their screens. And as they took the survey, and of course he's no longer at Dell, right? But for the most part, we feel like our team members feel like it's genuine responses and they don't feel pressure to respond. Now making it so engraved in the culture, does that make it good or bad? I don't know. Yeah. Cool.